All right, welcome to a year and a half in the Life of Metallca Part 1, Mystery Science Theater 3000 style, where I'm going to narrate some of the technical details of scene throughout this video. I edited out a lot of the non-studio footage. All right, so we're in Los Angeles, one-on-one recording studios. Drums, look at all those spot mics, 451s on every cymbal, just like the load notes. So all these scenes where they're sitting around the live room together playing, they're going for drum tracks. The guys are just playing scratch tracks, and then eventually when the drums are compiled and edited together, those scratch tracks are replaced by their real tracks. So they just have their live rigs next to them, the cabinets isolated. You can't really go by anything they use in those live room shots as to what made it on the album, at least other than Lars, that is.
So it was just like...
So there's a good shot of Lars's kit. You could see the Sennheiser 409s on the toms. You could also see the Neumann KM86 on the edge of the snare. That's that side address condenser, just like the Load album. In fact, if you look, it's tough to see here, but there is an SM57 sneaking in right between those two rack toms aimed at the snare. And it looks like those mics are in the same positions as the diagrams, the extensive diagrams in the Load studio notes that came with the box set. So I think all the rack toms here have 409s on top, 421s on the bottom. And I'll try to see what the floor toms have, if they have the 421s on top and 57s on the bottom like Load. But that would be my best guess, because I think they kind of kept mostly the same drum sound throughout those albums, mixed a little differently. Yeah, there's a 421 on the floor tom right there. That's easy to see. SM7 on the hi-hat, along with, I think, a 451.
Keep the dynamics kind of cool on the hi-hat.
It's an interesting combination. I'd like to try that sometime. There's a 421 on the bottom of that rack tom. So yeah, we could probably safely assume the same mics as the Load drum diagrams based on what we can see here.
Backbeat, that Lars Ulrich kind of snap on the old snare. Huh?
And Kirk with the Haagen-Dazs, very important part of guitar tone.
Versions a little more peppery off the top, a little more weight into it.
If you want weight, I'm your fucking guy.
Oh, wait over now. You make us wait forever. Yeah.
Get what?
Jesus.
I don't mind being the butt of Joe.
See the tissue paper over the NS10 tweeters? That was a really big thing back then. I saw a little bit of that in like the very late 90s. So you would put a little bit of tissue paper over the tweeter of the NS10, and what it does is it tames down the harshness and opens up the mid-range. You could hear a much more detail in the mid-range, and it's a really cool trick for NS10s. Of course, now there are, so many other great monitors out there. You could kind of, yeah, it's you don't have to go to such lengths these days, but that was very popular, and you saw that all the time with NS10s back then.
As long as they're as low as mine.
There you go. There you go. So 120, when he kicks in 121.
This is interesting hearing them talk about the tempos of different sections.
And then back to 121 for when that tom section comes in the middle.
So rather than finding one tempo for a whole song, like let's say, most times you'd find, say the song felt good at 120 BPM, you would, run the click for 120 throughout the whole song. They're talking about very incremental changes, like a 121 for a fill or 121 for a verse, and maybe slowing it down in a pre-chorus. I know in Enter Sandman, you can hear that. The pre-chorus is just like 1 or 2 BPM slower, and then the chorus picks back up again. And these are what you might consider a human tempo fluctuation, but we're still using the click for it because the click just makes editing things together so much easier. So, they're still playing to a click, but being very careful to keep those sort of, natural feeling fluctuations programmed in. And if you look, YouTube subscriber of ours, Tim the the Tooth 77 sent me some screenshots from the Black Album Super Deluxe box set book. And while the notes aren't as in-depth as the ones in the load book, there is a lot of info on tempos. And I think it's so cool that they tried the same song at multiple tempos. So you'd see different takes at different tempos. I'd imagine they would find a verse worked better at one tempo and one feel, and then maybe a chorus worked better at one tempo and another feel, and then you'd edit them together. And by having the click on there, that's kind of your grid. You know, you have to scrub the tape machine and mark it with a grease pencil and all that, but having a click track to go by gives you a grid to work with, and that's super helpful in this case.
120 guitar only, 121 when it's toms. Yeah.
123, the body of the song.
From a production standpoint, that's some really fascinating minutia to get into. Oh, this is cool. So James getting ready to do the Unforgiven classical guitar parts. We've got a Telefunken ELA M251 microphone. That would be the sort of off-white beige colored mic coming down from the top. That's going to be aimed kind of around the 12th fret of the acoustic, kind of right where the body meets the neck. And that's kind of a great starting point for a good acoustic sound. And that's one of the best mics ever made right there. And we've also got what I think is a very rare mic in the middle there. It's tough to say 100%, but I believe that is a Neumann KM66, which is the tube version of the KM86, like what's on the snare drum. Of course, this is in a black finish. That was the other option that Neumann offered for most of their microphones. The reason I think it's a 66 is if you look at the connector, it looks like the type of screw-on multi-pin connector that a tube mic would use, as opposed to a standard XLR cable. So yeah, I'm going with KM66 for that one there. And then all the way on the left, we have a 414, just looks like a standard AKG 414. And that's going to be aimed kind of at the bridge. And the combination of having most likely your main mic being the ELA M251 aimed up at the neck 12th fret area. Then you've got the black one in the middle aimed kind of more at the sound hole and the right hand fingers. And then the AKG 414 aimed at the bridge. You're going to get a really nice array of sounds coming from that guitar, and the phase relationships between them will really lend themselves to some natural EQing in a way that we know Bob Rock likes. He likes to EQ with different mics and phase.
He's, his music is his heart. You don't fuck with it, and so it was kind of weird for him, I think, the most, because not that he'd really say a whole lot of words or anything, but the guy would say something. He talking about my music, and eventually, we try the idea, and a lot of the time it will work because Bob has.
I always love the way that little jam sounded there on some Nothing Else Matters parts. And now we're tracking Sad But True. Kirk jamming on a Gretsch. Must have been Bob Rock's guitar. I don't think that one made the album. Notice the angled heads on those 451s aimed at the cymbals. That's pretty cool. Drums went to analog tape, Studer tape machine. Oh, this is cool. Track sheet. So much like the load track sheet that we were able to get a little bit of info from. Actually, it was the bus routing sheet on load that kind of showed us what tracks things were being mixed down to. You can see here, we've got stereo tom tracks. So even though he's using more toms, I think he had 5 or 6, I can't tell if it's 1 or 2 floors on here, but they are still being blended down across a pair of stereo tracks. Same with the overheads. All those cymbal spot mics and overhead mics, the pair of 87s overhead, they're all being mixed down together to a pair of tracks. And this goes to show, even back then when they were working with, I believe they kept this album down to 48 tracks. It was 2 24-track analog machines transferred to 2 24-track digital machines eventually. Still, it's kind of an old school approach to blend that stuff. That's Jason Corsaro was a big fan of that. It was, you know, sort of mixing as you're tracking. So you're making your tom mix, your overhead mix while you're tracking. And that way, when you actually do go to mix it, there's less decisions to make. And nowadays that seems crazy because that really went out the window somewhere around 2000 when tracking to DAWs, to Pro Tools and other DAWs became really popular. In fact, I didn't see much of it at all. Corsaro was one of the only guys I worked with that did that. Even when I worked with Dream Theater and Anthrax, and Dream Theater in particular, Portnoy was playing a massive drum set on the album I worked with them on, and they still all went to individual tracks, and we were still cutting to tape back then too. So yeah, Kevin Shirley had his hands full with that one. But yeah, I love that. And then if you look, you know, both hi-hat mics are blended to one track. Kick, we've got a kick room, which I can't really tell what mics they are. I know on load they had the Tube 47s about a yard out from the kick drums, and they called those kick room mics. I'm not sure what they were using here for them because you can't really make it out too well. But then the kicks left and right. So all the kick mics, which I believe on this album were 421, an RE20, and a 47 FET on the outside head. Those three mics on each kick were blended down to individual tracks. Snare top and bottom. Yeah, so those snare mics, the two snare top mics at least, were blended together. And then the snare bottom mic, which I think was a 451 on this album, had its own track. And you could see they were using, in terms of tape, they were using Agfa 469, which is very similar to Ampex 456 tape at a +5 bias level. Bed guitar Kirk, bed guitar James, and bed bass, those would all be scratch tracks. And then we've got two more kick tracks. Now I have a theory about these. I can't quite read what's written below them, but I think track 19 is the Rockhead kick sample that we also saw used on load sessions. That was from Bob Rock's band. It's a drum sample that I guess he came up with when recording his own band. And then the other one, it's really tough to read, but I think that might be the Dynacomp kick drum that has been a rumor that Bob and Randy used. I mean, it's wishful thinking, but I think that might say Dynacomp in there. Although I'd love to see it more clearly, but yeah, this is old, very old SD footage. And yeah, I did a little video on the parallel Dynacomp kick drum bus that is an old Randy Staub, Bob Rock rumor going back to the old internet days of the 90s. So can't confirm that, but also can't deny it. So I'm gonna stick with that. There's the click track on 21. And room mics 22 and 23, that would be all of the drum room mics blended down to just a pair of tracks. And then reference vocal on 24 there. Kirk with the ES295, early 50s. I know he tried that on The Unforgiven, but I'm not positive it actually made the album.
You're gonna sit and fiddle with it tomorrow anyway.
Jason with the Gretsch Rancher acoustic bass. There it is, fretless acoustic bass. I always thought those were cool. Kind of wanted to get one of those to play around with. Again, I don't think that's something that made the album. He has said in an October of '91 Bass Player magazine interview that the album was almost entirely Spectre NS2, with The Unforgiven being a 58P bass. And there's some pictures of that if you look at the outtake DVD of a year and a half, which I might end up doing a video just on the outtake DVD because there's some little gems in there too.
So it goes down, down, down.
Actually, I may do a video just on The Unforgiven because they used so many cool vintage instruments on that. Oh, there's a great shot of the snare mics. KM86 and 57 sneaking in there between the toms. So yeah, if we compare that to the load mic diagrams, they look to be in the same spot as that. Very cool.
Just kind of imagine that when you play it again, you know what I mean?
I think this is the scene where his snares pop off or puts a hole in the head, I think. Yep. Time to get a new head on that snare. So they did an interesting thing on this album, and talk about going to like extremes. The snare head that sounded best, they were using, I believe it was the Bell Brass Terminator snare, rented from Ross Garfield, the drum doctor. They were using a coated ambassador head, I believe, on the snare. And those heads really don't last very long, but they sound great. So they said after every 3 or 4 takes, they would have to replace the head on the snare. And what they would do is basically when they first got the sound they wanted, they took a sample of it. And after every few takes, they would compare the sound of the snare with that original sample and see how much it degraded. And if it was like significant, then they would replace the head. And they kind of just kept that going the whole time. And I thought that was really impressive. And I know with guitars, they did a similar thing with guitar strings where they would put fresh strings on and do one section of the song, then replace the strings, do another section of the song, and so on. So they were constantly using fresh strings and keeping the sound consistent. There's great lengths to albums like this.
We're gonna take like 25 minutes here and change the snare head and do another set. Okay?
Do you feel like I'm all over the place? Because I don't. I can usually tell when I start.
I'm not saying that you're all over the place. I'm just saying the overall feel isn't as good
Yeah.
as what it was. And,
But that's probably got a lot to do with the other 3 guys
well,
more so.
I think it's got a lot to do with it. Yeah. So there you go.
That's a good point. The importance of everybody being kind of in the zone, even when you're just doing scratch tracks. Because he was saying that the overall vibe of the drums wasn't feeling good, and it had a lot to do with the other guys. And that could get tedious, you know, when you're sitting there playing, you know, along with a drummer over and over again to get the best takes. You know, it kind of wears on you. And again, another good point of album production is sort of maintaining that energy for the whole band, and it's easier said than done.
We'll just tune up the snare. We'll do it one more time, and then we'll start.
Bob's your uncle.
And then Bob's your uncle.
And then Bob's your uncle.
The whole thing was positive as far as everybody playing together, except sometimes.
That's a great shot. You could see how the little angles on the 451 capsules. I've never used those before, but that is really cool to see how you can kind of aim the heads. I only ever use the capsules that just screwed on straight. So that's pretty cool. I like that.
Fucking heck.
So it just kind of, what do you go for?
You sure it's the fact that this is our last drum track? You're
You sad, Lars?
I'm a little sad, yeah. Just, I'm having a really good time. And I know everybody else is. I know I speak for everybody else.
The celebration of working on the
You can
final
tell
drum
the
track.
The vibe is quite serious. Big song on the record, just for the vibe.
Never really took the time to do that with any of the vocal stuff.
So they jumped to vocals here, but the vocals really didn't come till a bit later, after most of the guitars and bass were done. Oh, see that little Aurotone speaker right on the center of the console? Those were really popular back in the day when you had to mono compatibility, particularly for car stereos and you know, small boom boxes and tape players. That was a much bigger consideration than it is now. I don't think most people even really care about mono compatibility now, because I mean, even the speakers on your phone are in stereo. But yeah, having a little Aurotone like that mounted, you know, kind of right on top of the console or up on the bridge, that was big. And it was also really helpful for a lot of producers I worked with for hearing pitch. And I've noticed that listening to things on my iPhone. Like sometimes I can hear that a pitch being off more so on my phone speakers than I can even on like my good JBLs here. So Aurotone was pretty much a staple, you know, throughout the 80s and early 90s in studios.
Let's double that up. It's pretty good, but
Randy's got a cool little remote box. That could be a homemade box. If anybody knows the make of that, please let me know. But it's like a little remote control, not the big tape machine remote controls that you see in the background in some of the other shots, but a smaller one that he was able to keep right there next to the patch bay. And it could be one of those comping boxes where you can actually patch your different tape track inputs into it and then kind of select which take goes to which track when you're comping the vocal together. The way comping, if you're not familiar with the concept of comping, it's when you record multiple takes and then take the best parts of each. You know, it's simple to do in a DAW, agonizing to do in the analog realm, but it was still done all the time. So it's really not a new practice. It just used to be a lot more difficult than it is now.
A little more Hetfield in there.
So it looks like that little box has some machine control for the tape machine built into it. And here we've got James singing into a 47 FET, Neumann 47 FET microphone. That's the non-tube version of the 47. But it also looks like in the back there is, I think, an M49. So I don't know if the M49 was used. Most of the vocal shots show him singing into the 47 FET, but it's possible that they tried the 49 for some stuff. At least did a little shootout with it.
So I dug the unforgiven.
Vocal-wise, we tried a couple different things that I hadn't done before. I would do basically what Lars was doing with the drums. It was a master track. If you know, a word was wrong or out of key, we'd punch in that word or whatever, which was a lot easier.
So let's get it.
Tape on the floor to mark where to stand.
Never free, never me. So I dug the unforgiven.
Sony 3324. So my understanding of how the album was tracked with drums went to analog tape. We already went over that. The AGFA 469 tape, 24 track. Then once those drum takes are edited together, the master take is transferred to Sony 3324 digital tape. And that way you get no degradation from playback. And then a lot of the overdubs were done on the Sony machines. They synced up 2 machines for 48 tracks total. Yeah, here you can see the vocals being tracked to the 3324. I think bass was also tracked here, and lead guitars were. I think James' rhythm guitars were still tracked to analog tape. So what you do then is, you still transfer your drum master to digital, but then you make a submix of it. You make like a stereo submix of the drums, put that on analog tape. Now you need time code to sync up tape machines. You transfer that to analog tape, and then James could do all of his guitar overdubs, his rhythm tracks on analog tape, and it'll be in sync with the drums on the digital machine. And then eventually you can transfer James' master guitar tracks to digital, and they will all be lined up perfectly with the drums. And yeah, this whole SMPTE timecode syncing was, it was stressful, and it wasn't perfect, but it was a big part of, something you really needed to be on top of as an engineer back in the day.
One more time. Just got to get the unforgiven again. There we go.
Never free, never me. So I dug the unforgiven. Whoa.
Let me go from the top. Let's do this first verse.
See here, James is singing without headphones, and this is something I wanted to talk about.
Say your prayers, little one. Don't forget my son, to include everyone.
So without the headphones, he's using those Auratone cubes to hear the playback of the rest of the track. And what you do with that, because you would get bleed through the microphone, right? Playing the track out through the speakers. After you're done recording the vocal and comping it together and you've got your master take, then you play back the program through the Auratones and you record it through the microphone onto a separate track, but you flip the phase. And what it does is it cancels out the bleed on the vocal tracks. So you've got basically one track of the leakage and you flip that out of phase with the vocal track. So you just get vocals and all that background leakage is canceled out. And this was a really fun thing to play around with. I remember when I first learned about that, I thought it was one of the coolest things around. But you've got to have very precise measurements. That microphone has to stay the same distance from the speakers in order for that to work. And I think he wore headphones for some of the more intimate parts. We saw him using headphones for the Unforgiven before there. I think he probably used the headphones for some of the quieter parts, some of the parts where even the littlest amount of leakage, because it's not perfect cancellation. You're still going to get a little bit, but during an aggressive part like this, it doesn't really make a big difference.
Tuck you in, warm within, keep you free from sin, till the Sandman will come.
Regular voice.
See Bob using a nylon string guitar to give James the melody.
Same delivery.
That's a great production tool. I worked with several producers who used to do that. Some kept a little MIDI piano next to them for that. And just to the left of Randy's arm and face, you can see the rack of Neve 1081s that One-on-One Studios had. I believe they had 24 channels of 1081s left over from an older console. So they kept those on the side when they installed their SSL. And most inputs went through those. I'm sure the SSL pre's were used for additional inputs once they ran out. And then most things were mixed together on the SSL before going to tape. So that seems to be their signal flow, along with any additional outboard they might have patched in.
For guitars to kind of
The
keep
Tent of Doom.
close crunch.
So this is when chronology comes into play. Again, the vocals weren't cut till later. Once the drums were finished and edited and master takes were compiled, the next thing they did was the rhythm guitars.
Tightness. We had to build this kind of a
So you got the
thing,
tent.
which is basically some foam walls and some U-Haul blankets and all that.
I would love to try doing this someday.
He does get that Hetfield God sound.
And again, chronology-wise, this actually came later. This is James with the Dan Electro, or the Jerry Jones Longhorn, which, by the way, I just bought one for myself. And not only does it look just like the one James is playing here, but mine's a 1989, so it's kind of from the same era. I can't wait to get into that and do a video on these sounds. One thing that's very interesting is that there are no guitar amps in the control room for this, but all of Jason's bass amps are there. If you look directly behind James, you have Jason's live rack, which had some Trace Elliott GP11 preamps and Crown power amps in it. Right next to Bob Rock's head, I don't think we can get a better focus on that. If you look right next to Bob Rock's head, you'll see a Mesa Boogie Bass 400 head, or 400 plus. Can't really tell. Looks like it might have the graphic EQ, but it's not quite in focus there. Below that, you'll see some other shots later on. There was 2 Ampegs. There was a rack mount SVT2 and a vintage SVT head below that. And then all the way to the left on top of that shelf are a couple of SWR, I think it was SM400s were the big ones back then. And those, it's tough to tell what James is using here, but I just thought it was interesting that there are no guitar amps in the control room. So he was playing that Dan Electro or Jerry Jones Longhorn bass through some version of Jason's rig. And I am going to explore that on my own pretty soon. I love this little edit.
Okay.
Probably my favorite part of the video. And as you can hear, this actually came after he did his rhythm guitar tracks. Now we've got James cutting his regular rhythm tracks with a Virgil Hetfield in the background there.
I was just listening in there what you were cutting, and he's really improved in the guitar playing.
And now while
Instead of the power
James
chords, I think he's getting into a
is
little,
cutting rhythms
instrumental and
on the edited
good
drums,
guitar.
we've
I
got
like that.
Lars down the hallway, listening to his drum takes, making notes on what edits to make to them. So Lars has taken notes on fills and different sections. Eventually that tape will be edited and James will be able to record his rhythms on it.
Bob and James are there.
There we go.
James is shit, and then they have this closet down the hallway. Now I'm sitting here listening to all the takes off the floor and trying to make some basic notes and trying to, just get an idea of where the
Lars is just mansplaining what I just told you.
Shit is from the takes.
Hey, look, you can see a pair of Clark Technic graphic EQs. I wonder if those are the ones that ended up on Lars's kick drum, like we saw in the load notes. God, that cracked me up. James wearing headphones in the control room. That might seem kind of odd. The audio that we're hearing in this video is what the cameras are picking up that's coming out of the speakers, right? So I'm assuming here Bob and Randy wanted to be able to solo the guitar and hear it in high detail, while James needed to hear the drums and click track to perform his track. So I think that's the reasoning for him wearing headphones in the control room here.
Ask Secretary of State Baker to
Him or something. Go see that what he's doing now? He's putting pieces together.
Yeah, there's Randy Razorblade.
Basically, Randy Razorblade are brilliant in.
There's a good shot of that bass rack I was telling you about before. There's a vintage SVT. It's on top in that shot.
He would then
Sony 3324 remotes. We have two machines synced together, so two remotes for him.
basically sit and like cut the tape together. You know, that way you find the bits that have the most spunk and the most vibe and the most attitude to it. We have about 250 fills for this song.
There's James' guitar rig back there. That's looks like Boogie Mark IV directly behind Bob Rock to Bob's right. And then you have James' rack with the Mark II C pluses and the ADA MP1 and power amps. And that's the bulk of what James recorded his rhythms with on this album. In fact, it looks like that might be a Polaroid shot of the graphic EQ on there. Could be. Can't say that certainly, but it looks like it might be. I see 5 sliders in that one Polaroid.
But yeah, if you know anybody, yeah, we have drum fills for sale.
We could have used some of these fills about 4 months back.
Talking about the tape editing. So I would imagine Lars would come in with his notes, and they would compile the drums and give him a good listen. Make sure they were all in agreement.
That's Jason.
When I was learning to play bass, a lot of it was done with an amplifier. You know, I had one bass.
Now
and an
Jason
electric
talk.
bass, and wherever I happened to be, I just, you know, and I'd have to hear it, so I'd hit it really hard, beating the crap out of it. Now it's part of.
There we go. That's Bob adjusting the SWR bass heads. Those were used through some pretty big cabinets. I think 15s or 18-inch speakers for the low end of the bass in particular.
My style when we play. Bob and Randy could.
That's I think this is a cut from a different part, because I can't imagine them using this during the bass tracking. But that's an AMS DMX, and with a chorus strip on top of it, and it looks to me like either the VCO or the chorus is active, because you could see little movement between the numbers there. My favorite setting on there gives that little slight bit of modulation, the chorus effect that I like so much. And
Noise that was coming out of the speakers, the pick sound on the bass was interfering with what they were hearing coming out of the speakers. So they had to put a wall of foam in front of me so that they didn't hear the pick sound and they only heard the bass sound out of the speakers.
12 inches of foam to hold him back. That was Zach Harmon, bass tech, equipment tech, still with the band to this day.
He's the toughest guy.
I love the sound of that Spectre bass. So that Spectre is on like 95% of the album, with the exception of The Unforgiven. And if you look at it, if you find the stems, it's noticeably different, the sound on The Unforgiven. Again, I think I'm going to do a little video on that. And here we see Randy Staub putting on a pair of headphones, just like Jason's wearing a pair in the back of the room. And I think this is due to the pick sounds on the bass being just so loud that in order to hear any detail at all of the actual notes and performance, they needed to listen on headphones, even with the 10 inches of foam there. Now they're discussing the parts. You can see Jason's bass rig back there. The Trace Elliott GP11 preamps. That was his direct sound on this album. I remember him mentioning that. It was part of his live rig. He was using the Trace Elliott's through the Crown Power amps, I guess on the Justice tour that would have been. But he ended up taking the GP11s direct, and then the bulk of the sound was Ampeg SVT through an 8x10, and then the SWRs through those much larger, subwoofer cabs for the bottom. And I'm sure there was other stuff mixed in. We saw the Mesa 400. That could have very well been a part of it. Although, I have a theory on that I'm going to get to in the James playing the Longhorn bass video.
Okay, let's try this, Jason. Okay.
So he's playing a wall bass there for Don't Tread on Me. He had said that, you know, he used a wall 5-string, I think, for all of And Justice for All. And he said that he tried his walls and his alembics for the recording of this album, but ended up going with the Spectre over them, again, with the exception of the Unforgiven. But it certainly sounds good right here. We can't confirm that this was actually used on it. I haven't found the official stems of this song to compare.
We went through a bunch of different basses in all different configurations of amplifiers, and Bob just helped me along the way in saying, you know, what is the bass sound that we're out to achieve here? What's going to work with the guitars?
So the fretless Stingray, man, I always wanted to believe that that made it for Nothing Else Matters, but if you listen to the stems, it did not. The bass, even in the mellow verses, and you know, you can hear frets even when he's doing those slides. So yeah, that bass did not make the cut. And then later on in the song, I think he went from playing a Spectre with his fingers to then playing it with a pick for the guitar solo section when it gets heavy towards the end. Because the overall tone of the bass doesn't change that much. I mean, he may have just turned his volume up on the bass and switched to a pick, but I think it's the Spectre even on the mellow parts of that song.
What's going to work with the bass drums and not kill him?
Huge fucking lick.
Because the guys in Anthrax and Megadeth would just like tease him so much if it was melodic and nice, right?
Where's my goddamn food?
By the way, right next to Randy there on that rack, right above the SSL patch bay, those are GML EQs and I think compressors as well. And those were kind of his Swiss Army knife EQs for tracking. It looks like they did a lot of that on Load as well. So whatever they were tracking, if they needed to make some natural sounding EQ adjustments, the GMLs seemed to be the go-to for that because they were probably a little more transparent than even the SSL EQ on the desk or the Neve 1081. Certainly more transparent than the Neves. And now they're going up to Vancouver, Little Mountain Studios, Bob Rock's home base, and presumably where most of his gear collection is kept. So James played around with a lot of guitars and amps that Bob has in his personal collection up there.
We tried a bunch of different shit, you know. Certain amps, like old thing at the Supro that Jimmy Page was using and shit. Some 12-string stuff.
I don't know how well known it was at the time, but you know, everybody kind of associates the Gibson EDS 1275 double neck with Stairway to Heaven because Jimmy Page used it in The Song Remains the Same, Play Live. But on the album, it's actually a Fender Electric 12. And I have that here. That's part of my little vintage collection here. And that's an awesome guitar. An electric 12-string is a wonderful thing to have in the studio. It doesn't have to be a vintage one. It doesn't have to be fancy. You could go get a reissue Dan Electro 12-string or Eastwood, or you know, a lot of cool companies make them. They are so wonderful for little accent parts like James is doing here. Looks like all this guitar stuff he did up in Vancouver was little texture, accent, sort of character pieces.
You know, sitar thing on Wherever I May Roam. That's just the cool thing about guitar. You can kind of get a little wild with them.
There were some Neve 1081s there. There we go, right next to Randy. Those really do seem to be the preferred Neve preamps of both Bob and Randy. They're very, very similar to like the more well-known 1073s. You know, they still have a Class A preamp on the input side, but they have a more extensive EQ with an extra mid-range band and more frequency options. And they have a Class AB output stage, which results in slightly quieter operation and also a little tighter on the bottom than the Class A Neves, which could be a little larger and more saturated on the bottom. We're comparing, you know, this is super minutia. So I think most people would be very happy with either. Still tissues on the NS10 tweeters up in Vancouver there.
Oh, those are fine. It's just going back to the D was a little frotz.
Frotz. So they've got some GM EQs there. Rickenbacker.
Fucking
Buying it now.
B-Bender Telly. My friend in Missouri. I have a B-Bender that I used for my recreation of it as well. Coral sitar. Everybody loves this shot of the Gretsch. He basically used it for one chord, and it's forever associated with that song.
And then we should try and get something that is a little more, got a little more of a different sound. So it really sticks out. Maybe even like the Leslie 12 string, just like we talked about yesterday.
Speaking of Leslie's.
Oh, he followed him. God. Look what it did to my shirt. This was a white shirt when I came in here this morning.
Randy with the jokes.
Help!
You're my mask, you're my cover, my shelter. You're my mask.
Back to singing in front of the 47 FET with the Aratones. Humidifier there. It's not a smoke machine.
James and Bob flew up there, did some vocals, guitar.
Scott Humphrey, synthesizers. Humphrey went on to become a very prolific producer in his own right, working with White Zombie, Rob Zombie. Scott was also a very early Pro Tools guy. I think he did some Pro Tools work with them on the Load albums, which was the first time Metallica used Pro Tools. I think just for vocals on Load and Reload.
Kind of sounds like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, doesn't it, right there?
On the Garage Inc. studio footage, you could see them editing drums in Pro Tools, and I think that was the first time they did that in '98.
Well, Lars, huh? You happy we're in the digital age, huh?
It's great. I can't wait till I have to play drums.
That's the next album. You just gotta play him
Show
once.
him the songs, we'll go out drinking, come back 3 months later, and the album's done.
That's it.
Yeah, Lars just predicted the future there with that comment about, you know, showing the programmer the songs, go out drinking, come back 3 months later, and the album's done.
That's it.
I thought this was really cool, all the percussion.
Fucking table, like, from here to
Bob Rock has said that there is percussion on every song in one form or another. Shaker. It's amazing how subliminally that stuff helps in terms of movement, rhythmic movement. Got a 414 there, maybe stereo 414s, I think. That looks like a 451. How to mic up a shotgun.
Hetfield's house.
And now it's guitar solo time. That was a cool shot of his rack. Bogner and a Mesa 400, but he said that that really didn't get used as much as the custom audio preamp, the 3 Plus preamp there into the VHT 2150. That was a big part of his lead sound on this album. And in a September or October 91 Guitar Player interview, he said there was no tube screamer used on this album, which blew my mind. I never would have guessed that.
From hearing a piece of music, like maybe classical music,
and note his cabinets were not in the tent.
Really good,
they were open in the room.
I think
probably a good way to differentiate it from James' guitar tones.
Marshall or something. A combo.
Hey, let's try it. We're gonna try everything all at once.
And turn everything up and play that way.
Roger, that would be number 2.
This little montage is great. Showing how he tried every solo with a variety of guitars. Tom Anderson. The Tom Anderson Pro-Am, he played this one a lot on the Justice tour, and he didn't talk about it much for the Black album, but this is the guitar that James Hetfield used for the clean guitar parts of Enter Sandman and Nothing Else Matters on this album. He used the neck pickup an EMG single coil. I've got a whole video coming up on that, but it's such a unique guitar sound. And it's not just plug into an amp. There's a lot more going on. Anyhow, we'll talk about that more someday. Bob Rock's Les Paul. This guitar, it's tough to tell here. It's got P90 soap bar pickups on it. This was used for the Sad But True guitar solo. At least according to Kurt, this was the one that sounded best for that. And out of all the options they tried. So it's really tough to tell what he used for what solo.
Let's try another guitar.
Well, tweak a knob or something, you know, inadvertently.
Exactly.
So now Kirk's working on the Unforgiven solo.
What, the sound isn't great?
Speaker's rattling. So they're out there fixing it right now. I mean, it sounds good, but I can hear the rattle when we play it on the solo.
That speaker is not happening.
Why don't you try hooking up the smaller one?
James fucked it up.
The small one. How do you do that?
Playing through it?
That 295 is such a beautiful guitar. I know he said in an interview that the interview he did for Guitar Player in '91 was actually taken before he was finished recording his solos, and he mentioned wanting to use this on the Unforgiven solo, but I don't think it actually made it. I think if you listen to the clean part of the solo, it's very clearly a Strat, and I have some theories about what was used for the main solo. I'll give you a hint. It's not the take that you see coming up here later, but we'll get into that more.
Maybe that
There we go. Yep, little electrocution. That's the 63 Strat that he talked about using for the solo.
What good advice?
Don't touch it. Do it.
And yeah, the clean part is very clearly a Strat, in my opinion.
You have to stop that up.
Is that piss?
No.
When okay, hold this guitar.
Did you piss?
Do you think I staged that electrocution?
Well, fucking everybody knows that there's like.
Solo for the Unforgiven.
Oh, that's Bob Rock's Les Paul again with the P90s.
Just like a touch.
Okay, well let's go back to your regular sound then. Because I want to do the solo, I don't want to fuck around with sounds. I'll put it through an amp later.
So Bob's line right there, I'll put it through an amp later, reveals to me that they were reamping guitars back then. So they were probably taking clean DIs of Kirk's leads so that they could run them through various combinations of amplifiers and Kirk's gear later on to get the perfect sound for each given song. So I think that's pretty cool to point out that they were reamping guitars way back in 1991. Pretty awesome.
What do you suggest? Suggest that he leaves and comes back?
It's like he's got to fucking eat, sleep, and breathe this fucking solo until it's done. Like fucking James put time.
So yeah, I'd love to know what all those pedals are up there. It looks like a Boss Overdrive pedal. It looks like maybe a DOD, that yellow one on the left there. I can't quite tell what that is. Maybe an MXR Blue Box up there, which I don't think I could really hear anywhere on the album. And we've got the two. That's Bob's Jose Marshall on top back there. It was before the logo was turned into the asshole Marshall. But that piece of tape, it's tough to tell here because it's out of focus, but it does say Bob's Jose on it. And then the purple one below it, I'm not really sure what the status of that is.
After many years of experience working with some of the finest guitarists ever to bless fucking music, one of the first things that happen when a guitar player hasn't done his homework is he goes, this sound ain't working for me, man. I just
So true.
Just thought I'd let you know. Okay? That's Bob Rock's School of Production.
And there's a really good shot of all 24 Neve 1081 channels at One-on-One Studios. And the cringe version of the solo.
Remember what I said about guitar players that don't do their homework? Remember that.
Hey man, I do my homework. I do, man. It just doesn't work when I'm in the studio.
You know, like, it's like crackle, boom, da-da-doo-doo, da-da-doo-doo. You know, it's fucking.
Let him do his thing.
You know what I mean? It's like it should play off what's there. Going up high, it's just like. Dun, 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 dun. Do whatever you want, Kirk. And you agree with him? Go for it, man.
Well, come on, let's cut the shit and start working.
Cut to the chase and fucking play, okay?
All right, man.
Now that you've, warmed up, let's hear the fucking Guitar Player of the Year solo.
3324 tape for the overdubs. So even though this is the form of the solo that made the album, this is not the tape that did. Yeah, they refined it a little more beyond this. Probably tried it out with a million guitars. I do think I'm going to do a deep dive on this sometime soon. I do think this made the album. And I think they used just this whammy bar
It's pretty
fade
much,
out
pretty much
and tacked it on to another take. All right, now they're moving out a one-on-one, and they're moving to A&M. There's Boogie Mark IV.
Left to do vocals, and it's like, go, you know.
Moving to A&M Studios for mixing.
So we're gonna do vocals first in the next album. Yeah. Work around them, man.
See, James talks there about the vocals coming last.
In late May of '91, we packed up and basically moved the operation over to A&M Studios, finishing up some vocal
They went to
tracks
A&M, I
and doing
believe,
odds and
to use a
ends that
larger
just weren't
SSL
really done
console
yet.
for mixing, something
We
with more
would,
inputs.
be
I
mixing
think it was a 72 input board.
75% of the time there.
And even
The
though
mixing process
the
is
tapes
where
were
you
only
take
48
every
track, they
separate
needed all the extra
individual
inputs
track
for all
and put
the
it on
effects
board, and
returns,
basically mix the whole thing
reverbs,
together. At that
delays,
point in time, you can make the
choruses,
record sound completely fucking different.
everything they were
You
using.
fuck with
Mults,
everything.
splits.
EQ-wise, echo-wise, you can balance it, you can pan it, you can put it to the left, you can put all these chambers on.
I'm sure there was some parallel stuff going on.
To the whole thing, and I think that we all had a really fine idea of just what was best for this fucking thing that we were doing.
Look at how much more outboard gear is behind them for the mix.
And that middle 8 guitar section. Mm-hmm. I think those accents in the second half of it. Wow, now, now, now.
Mm-hmm.
Clark Technographic EQ behind Lars.
What?
It cracks me up still.
Accents? Okay.
It's nice to have a breather there.
Yeah.
Why don't we do this one without it?
AMS delays, look at that. There's one right above Rock's head. Actually, two of them right above Bob's head behind Lars there.
It's not as loud.
Idea.
Take that one out too.
Which one?
That little reverb.
Only I want a little more kick, and make sure that first ga is up, okay?
On the drums? On the snare?
No, on the guitar.
Oh,
Ga. Okay, and a little more kick. There you go.
They're running the SSL VCA automation.
Probably the biggest song of your career, right there.
You witnessed it.
The first song I heard.
Yeah, that's true. Cashmere of the '90s.
What is your problem?
I don't
The
have a
heavy
problem.
guitars aren't loud enough.
Okay, he walked in and said dynamics. When they come in, you don't sense that the heavy guitar is coming.
Right,
That
they're
could've
not
something
loud
with
enough.
the rest of the shit.
They're
That-
not loud enough. What is the problem?
You could start by taking the.
I don't want to take the other things down.
Yeah, actually, that
because
above Bob's head, we've got an AMS delay. It looks like an AMS RMX reverb. And then all the way on the left, kind of above Randy's head, there's another AMS delay with the chorus strip on top of it there. A couple SSL outboard stereo compressors. They were mixing on an SSL 6000E, which is basically the same as a 4000, except it has 3 stereo buses instead of just one. and that allowed them to have the drums and bass on their own bus that they could compress, and then the guitars, James rhythm guitars, on its own bus that were not compressed, and blend them together. And then I believe the third bus was basically everything else: vocals, lead guitars, reverb returns, etc.
Those things were down when I heard them. There was nothing there. It needs to be up. Those things need to be up during the shots. It goes bum, bum. It's not bum. Bum. It sounded stupid, so I turned them up because it's the only thing there. It's the only piece of music in those shots.
Several GML EQs floating around here and there
so
too.
They turned them up. So the next section has to come in strong. It does come in strong. The only thing that doesn't come in strong is the guitars. James was in the car. Isn't that what it sounded like? Did it sound like Metallica? No, it didn't. It didn't even sound close. The guitars aren't loud enough. I'll let you guys duke it out on this one because frankly I don't give a fuck. I'm tired of arguing.
No, you're not.
Yes, I am.
No, you're not.
We're not trying to argue.
Oh, looks like some vintage Eventide units behind Bob there. Oh, actually, is that a Dim D chorus? It could be. That could be a Roland Dimension D. It's tough to tell. But yeah, it looks like a vintage Eventide. Can't tell exactly what unit it is, but it's got that look to it. Right underneath the Clark Technic graphics.
Well,
You just listen to it over and over and over again until you've, found the places where you want to boost certain things and where you want to bring voices in different spots and, strings in bigger and different things like that. So
you notice on the SSL, it looks like all the faders are at the same level, which kind of looks funny for a mix. This is how the SSL VCA automation worked. You basically set all your faders to 0 and then use the trims to adjust your levels. When you make automation moves in the computer, it's not moving fader automation. That's the simplest way to say it. So you set all your faders at 0 for optimum headroom, and then get into the trims and the automation write modes to boost or cut certain things. And you could see them visually on the computer screen. It was just like a green screen type of computer. It was nothing fancy, but that's how you would actually see your dB increments during automation.
Everybody wants to make sure that it sounds good as a unit.
Looked like they had a pair of KRKs out. That's the first I've seen of them. Alongside the NS10s.
After you've mixed down
mastering
on like a digital master, you then make production masters.
George Marino at Sterling
Cut the
Sound.
records
Rest
that
in
they
peace.
print the CDs
Legends.
And make records from and stuff like that. And it's a pretty cool process. So how does
So that is a Sony stereo digital tape machine. They mixed down to that format. And then when they got to New York to do the mastering, they discovered that those tapes had been corrupted. The digital data had been corrupted, and there were all sorts of little, ticks and clicks all over them. So they were unusable. So they actually had to master the album off a backup DAT tape of the mixes, which is kind of amazing for an album that has sold so many copies, one of the best-selling albums of all time, to think that it was actually mastered off of a DAT tape. And this super high-quality format that they mixed down to actually failed them, which is just goes to show, nobody was impervious to stuff like that.
cute shit he's done sound?
Sounds really good. It's pretty minimal. It's just a little bit in the bottom, as in about 100 cycles, but that varies from tune to tune. And it's all in the mid-range, and it's all 1 or 2 dB.
Nothing in the high top?
No. It's pretty in line. It sounds really good.
Cool.
So that's that. This is definitely my longest YouTube video to date. And I hope you guys dug it. If there's anything I missed, please let me know. If anybody else has a keener eye. I know this wasn't exactly the highest quality video, but even the DVD, I think, is only SD format. I don't think there's an HD version of this out there at all. So yeah, I think I'm going to do another one for the outtakes, and I might do one for some of the Load and Garage Inc. recording footage as well, if you guys like this one. So again, please like, comment, subscribe, all that great stuff. Hope you enjoyed this. Thank you.